Imagine a child, no older than 8, playing quietly in a sunlit room. The afternoon is calm, and the world seems to pause around them. On the dresser sits a mirror, fragile, elegant, and completely ordinary. The child picks it up, amused by the way it catches the light, fascinated by their own reflection. They laugh, twist, and turn it, caught in the magic of self-discovery, but then something slips, a crash. 1,000 shards of glass scatter across the floor. The moment shifts from wonder to fear in a heartbeat. The mother rushes into the room, startled by the sound. She takes in the scene, shattered glass across the tiles, the child standing frozen, eyes wide with dread. They wait for punishment, but instead, something unexpected happens. The mother kneels beside the child, gently picks up a piece of glass, and speaks in a calm, steady voice, "It's okay. It's just a mirror. I'm glad you're not hurt." No shouting, no blame, just presence, a different choice. The same event, broken glass, but an entirely different emotional outcome, simply because of the meaning given to it. This moment, small as it may seem, holds a powerful truth. It is not events that disturb us, but how we interpret them. Epictetus, a philosopher born nearly 2,000 years ago, expressed this insight with unforgettable clarity. People are not disturbed by things, but by the view they take of them. The world, in its essence, is neither kind nor cruel, it simply is. It's our perception, our judgment, our internal dialogue that gives rise to peace or pain. And in that truth lies both a challenge and a path to freedom. At first glance, this idea may seem too simple, to clean for a messy, complicated life. But consider this: if it is not the world that disturbs us, but our judgment of it, then peace of mind is not something to chase outside, it's something we can cultivate within. In a culture obsessed with controlling outcomes, people, images, reputations, this is a radical shift. It tells us we don't have to change the world to be okay. We only need to learn how to see it differently. Let's think about modern life. Every day, we encounter things we can't predict or prevent: delays, criticism, misunderstandings, rejection. The instinct is to react: anger, anxiety, disappointment. But what if the emotion didn't come from the event? What if it came from the story we told ourselves about the event? Stoicism teaches us to pause and ask, is this truly bad? Or am I telling myself it is? That small question opens the door to inner stability. It interrupts the automatic loop of reactivity. Stoicism, far from being cold or emotionless, is deeply human. It doesn't tell us to stop feeling but to feel wisely. It teaches that emotions are not enemies, but signals. And the strongest signal of all is that we suffer not from life's chaos, but from our interpretation of it. Being criticized doesn't hurt until we believe it means we're unworthy. Losing a job doesn't destroy us until we decide it defines our value. The Stoics would urge us to examine these beliefs, not the events. Epictetus, perhaps more than any other Stoic, embodied this philosophy with striking authenticity. Born into slavery, physically disabled, he had no control over the conditions of his early life. But he discovered something extraordinary. While others controlled his body, they could not touch his mind. He realized that true freedom does not depend on external liberty, it comes from mastering our inner responses. This insight didn't make his life easier, it made it resilient. It gave him strength not by changing the world, but by changing the way he stood within it. His message feels more relevant than ever in our time. We are bombarded by news cycles, expectations, comparisons, and pressures. Social media shows us idealized lives. The economy reminds us of uncertainty. Relationships grow complex, and in the middle of all this, we carry an inner storm, often believing that peace lies just one success, one compliment, one solved problem away. But the Stoics challenge that idea completely. They say, stop chasing peace. Start noticing how you disturb it within yourself. This doesn't mean we become passive or indifferent. Stoicism is not apathy, it's clarity. It's learning to discern what belongs to us and what doesn't. We don't control the weather, but we choose whether we step out with an umbrella or curse the rain. We don't control other people's words, but we choose whether to carry them as wounds or let them pass like echoes. We don't control fate, but we control how we meet it. This shift from reaction to response is where personal power lives. In the story of the broken mirror, the mother had every reason to scold her child. She had the right, but she chose restraint. She chose meaning over impulse, and in that choice, she gave her child not just relief but a model for emotional maturity. We often forget that our responses teach others how to feel. A calm presence can ripple outward just as much as an angry one. Each time we react consciously, we create a more stable world not just for ourselves, but for those around us. So let's pause together and reflect. How many times have we let a moment, just a small, fleeting moment, ruin an entire day? A look, a comment, a delay, and how many of those moments actually had the power to disturb us? If we hadn't handed them that power, what if we could reclaim that control not over life's events, but over our interpretation of them? What if every challenge was not a threat, but an invitation to grow in clarity? This video is about more than just a quote. It's about a way of seeing, a way of being. Over the next few sections, we'll explore where this idea came from, how the Stoics practiced it, and perhaps most importantly, how you can begin to practice it today. In your work, in your relationships, in the quiet conversations you have with yourself. This is not a philosophy locked in history, it is a compass, waiting to be picked up again. And it begins with a single question: is it the event that disturbs me, or my judgment of it? Sometimes, all it takes is asking that honestly, gently, to begin seeing the world, and yourself, in a completely different light. Let us go back 2,000 years into the past. A time before psychology, before therapy, before hashtags and digital advice threads. In those days, philosophy wasn't something you read to sound smart, it was something you lived to survive. And there, in the heart of the Roman Empire, lived a man named Epictetus, born a slave, disabled, and denied the freedoms most people take for granted. He discovered that no one, not even a cruel master, could take away the power he had over his own mind. Epictetus was born in Hierapolis, in what is now Turkey. Around the year 50 CE, he was brought to Rome as a slave to serve a high-ranking official. At some point during his youth, his leg was permanently damaged, some say by torture. He walked with a limp for the rest of his life. And yet, through suffering, he found clarity. When he was eventually freed, he began teaching philosophy not in grand lecture halls, but in humble spaces where students sat at his feet, seeking the strength he carried within. He never wrote down his teachings himself. Everything we know of his ideas comes from a student named Arian, who documented them in the Discourses and the Enchiridion, or the Handbook. These writings are not dry theory, they are field notes for the soul guidelines for how to face pain, loss, insult, injustice, and fear. Among the most famous of these teachings is the simple sentence we keep returning to: people are not disturbed by things, but by the view they take of them, a line that has endured for centuries. This statement may seem small at first, but it is nothing less than a redefinition of power. It shifts our focus from what happens to us to what happens in us. In a world obsessed with control, it dares to say, the only thing that ever truly belongs to you is your perspective. And if you can control your perspective, then nothing, not loss, not chaos, not even death, can fully disturb your inner peace. It's an invitation to responsibility, but also to liberation. This teaching comes from the Stoic tradition founded by Zeno of Citium in Athens around 300 BCE. The Stoics believed that happiness does not come from wealth, reputation, or comfort, but from living in alignment with nature. And nature, to them, meant logic, order, and cause and effect. To live well was to live rationally, to see things clearly. They believed the highest good was virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline, and that everything else was secondary. even irrelevant. One of the most essential teachings in Stoicism is what Epictetus called the dichotomy of control. He wrote, "Some things are up to us, and some things are not. The things up to us, our judgments, choices, desires, and actions. The things not up to us, our bodies, our reputation, what others do, what others say, what fortune gives or takes away. When we forget this difference, we suffer. When we remember it, we become uncheckable, anchored in something that can't be taken away." Let's bring this back to his central idea. If someone insults you, what happens? The insult exists, the words are said, but the insult only wounds you if you agree with it, or if you believe your worth depends on how others see you. In truth, the insult has no power, only your interpretation gives it power. Epictetus even said, "If someone speaks ill of you, and it's true, correct yourself. If it's false, laugh. The insult can't hurt you unless you let it in." That may sound difficult, even cold, but it's not about pretending. It's about preserving your dignity. Epictetus wasn't inviting people to become emotionless robots, he was teaching them to become masters of their emotions, not slaves to them. His life as a former slave taught him that external control is real, but so is inner freedom. He had nothing, yet lived with a kind of richness many never find. He believed that no one could harm you without your consent, because harm only exists where your judgment allows it. He wasn't alone in this thinking. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, one of the most powerful men in history, carried a copy of Stoic principles in his heart and in his private journal. He wrote to himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In his book Meditations, he constantly reminded himself that pain is not in events, but in opinion. He ruled an empire, but he knew true rule began with ruling the self. Seneca, another great Stoic, lived in very different conditions. He was a wealthy Roman senator, a playwright, and advisor to Emperor Nero. He witnessed the cruelty of court politics and narrowly escaped death more than once until, finally, he didn't. And yet, in his letters and essays, he shared Stoic wisdom with startling clarity. He wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. The mind, left alone, creates unnecessary pain." Stoicism was his method of calming the storms before they ever arrived. From a slave to an emperor, the same insight flowed through each of them, that the greatest human challenge is not the outside world but our own beliefs, our reactions, our habits of thought. This idea, repeated across their writings, was not academic, it was medicine. A way to stay centered in chaos, a path through uncertainty. Stoicism asked not, "How can I change the world?" but rather, "How can I meet the world without losing myself?" That question remains timeless. So, what can we take from all this? What does it mean for us today? In an age of anxiety, where control feels like a myth, this philosophy offers something more realistic and more powerful. It doesn't promise to fix your problems. It doesn't promise you'll never feel pain. But it does promise that you can reclaim the space between stimulus and response. And in that space lies your peace, your choices, your freedom, your story written by you, not the world. The wisdom of Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca is not old, it is eternal, because it speaks to something every human must face: adversity, loss, injustice, fear. You cannot escape these things, but you can meet them with clarity. You can remember, it is not the thing that disturbs you, it is how you see it. This truth, practiced daily, can become your foundation. Not a wall to hide behind, but a compass to move forward with. In the next part of this video, we'll bring this wisdom into the present, into your inbox, your relationships, your moments of doubt and frustration. Because philosophy does not live in books, it lives in how you get through the day, in how you speak to yourself, in how you rise when things fall apart. Let's explore how to practice Stoicism in a noisy, modern world. But for now, breathe, and remember, you don't have to change the world to be at peace. You only need to change the way you see it. The present moment is where Stoicism becomes real. Not in the quiet of ancient scrolls, but amid the noise of modern life, rushing schedules, uncertain outcomes, shifting emotions. In such a world, the idea that we are disturbed not by events, but by our interpretation of them is not just wise, it is necessary. Though life today is shaped by digital tools and global speed, the emotional reactions remain human and timeless. Stress and fear arise not simply from what occurs, but from how we think about what occurs. Stoicism doesn't ask us to erase emotion, it invites us to understand it, to observe the thought behind the feeling, and from there, to reclaim our ability to respond with clarity. Work offers one of the clearest examples. It is rarely the task itself that overwhelms, but the weight we place on it, expectations, comparisons, the fear of failure all contribute to anxiety. Yet when we shift our attention to what we can truly control, our preparation, effort, and presence, we begin to find calm. The pressure softens when we stop trying to own outcomes we cannot command. This doesn't mean withdrawal. It means showing up fully, but without attachment to how others react or results unfold. We begin to define success not by validation, but by alignment. Did we act with integrity? Did we give our best? With this mindset, work becomes less a battlefield of status and more a space of practice of self-discipline, clarity, and calm. Relationships, too, reflect this principle. Emotional pain often comes not from others' actions, but from the expectations we carry into interactions. We wish others would always understand, always agree, always treat us fairly. But people act from their own inner worlds. The more tightly we hold our ideals of how others should behave, the more often we suffer. Stoicism teaches us to accept what we cannot control, including people. We still set boundaries, we still speak honestly, but we release the demand for others to be different. That release creates space for compassion, for calm, for seeing others as they are. Our sense of peace no longer hinges on their approval. We stop being pulled by their moods and begin choosing our own posture. Daily frustrations are perhaps the easiest entry point to practice. A delay, a rude gesture, a device malfunction, such small events can stir strong feelings, but the intensity of our response often comes from internal resistance, not the event itself. When we expect the world to match our pace and plans, every disruption feels like an attack. But when we approach life with greater flexibility, even inconvenience becomes bearable. In these moments, we practice acceptance not as resignation, but as clarity. We remind ourselves what's within our power and what isn't. We let go of unnecessary tension. Over time, this creates emotional endurance. Fewer things steal our energy. We become less reactive, more intentional. Failure is another area where Stoic thinking transforms how we engage with life. In a culture that emphasizes achievement, failure is often felt as personal collapse. But from a Stoic view, failure is not identity, it's information. A result? Not a judgment. It shows what didn't work. It offers feedback for the next attempt. It doesn't diminish our worth unless we let it. This shift is liberating. When we're no longer afraid of failing, we become more courageous. We try with sincerity, reflect with humility, and move forward without shame. The result is a quiet confidence that doesn't depend on winning, but on learning. We develop resilience not as armor, but as flexibility. Modern psychology supports this approach. Cognitive behavioral therapy, widely used today, rests on the idea that thoughts shape emotions. When we change how we interpret events, we change how we feel about them. This therapeutic model mirrors Stoic insights, offering tools for inner balance by focusing on the stories we tell ourselves and choosing better ones. Even digital life reflects this truth. On social media, comparison is everywhere. We see the polished images of others' lives and interpret them as signs of our own lack. But again, the suffering is in the meaning we create, not the image itself. When we forget that we're comparing our behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel, envy takes root. Stoicism helps us step back, We remember our value isn't measured by appearance or attention, but by our inner clarity. Uncertainty, whether waiting for news, entering change, or facing silence, is another trigger for distress. In these moments, the mind tends to fill in the blanks with fear. But this anticipation often creates more pain than the situation itself. Stoicism offers a steadier path. By anchoring attention to what we can do, how we think, how we act, how we breathe, we regain control. Uncertainty loses its edge when we stop trying to predict and begin preparing calmly for whatever may come. This is the deeper gift of Stoicism, not a formula for controlling life, but a framework for meeting life. We stop demanding constant comfort. We begin embracing discomfort as part of the process. We stop chasing perfection and start practicing presence. That presence shows up in small acts, a moment of stillness before speaking, a quiet decision not to take something personally, a deep breath instead of a harsh reaction. These are subtle victories. They build the architecture of a calm mind, one that is no longer pulled by every shift of mood or external circumstance. Living stoically doesn't mean being emotionless. It means having emotions without being ruled by them. It means honoring what we feel while choosing not to be swept away. It's the art of seeing clearly, without illusion, responding, not reacting, leading ourselves, rather than being led by fear or habit. Over time, this way of seeing becomes second nature. We become less rattled by judgments, less addicted to praise, less consumed by what others think. In that steadiness, we find real freedom, not the kind that comes from escape, but the kind that grows from perspective. To see differently is not to avoid life, but to engage with it more fully. To suffer less, not by hiding, but by facing life with wisdom. Peace is no longer something to pursue, but something we uncover once the noise of interpretation quiets down. And when we remember this, life doesn't have to be perfect to be peaceful. It just needs to be seen with clarity. What if nothing needs to change outside of you for peace to begin? What if the weight you carry isn't in the world, but in the way you hold it? What if suffering, more often than not, is a mirror not of reality, but of your relationship to it? These are not easy questions, but Stoicism doesn't offer easy answers. Instead, it offers a lens clearer than comfort, sharper than optimism. It doesn't tell us to expect the best, but to prepare for anything. It doesn't ask us to avoid pain, but to look it in the eye without flinching. In doing so, we begin to reclaim something modern life often strips from us, our agency. The Stoic path is, at its core, an invitation to radical responsibility, not for everything that happens, but for how we respond. It tells us that even when we lose control of events, we have not lost control of ourselves, and that's enough. Because the difference between peace and panic often lies not in the size of the problem, but in the clarity of the mind that faces it. Think back to a moment when something external shook you: an insult, a loss, a disruption. In that instant, the reaction felt automatic. But was it? Could you, in another moment, have paused? Could you have seen it differently, not with denial, but with distance? Could you have remembered? This is outside me. How I interpret it is mine. That's the quiet strength Stoicism builds. Not immediate perfection, but gradual awareness. A mind that doesn't cling to the highs, nor collapse with the lows. A heart that doesn't harden, but deepens in stillness. This inner transformation doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, in conversations, in failures, in silent mornings, in the gap between impulse and action. To live stoically today is not to withdraw from life, but to meet it on clear terms. When someone misunderstands us, we don't rush to defend. When things go wrong, we don't immediately blame. When plans fall apart, we don't fall with them. This isn't indifference, it's dignity. It's choosing steadiness over spectacle. It's standing where we are, breathing deeply, and saying, "This moment is mine to meet. As I choose." It's tempting to look for solutions in changing jobs, relationships, environments, and sometimes, change is necessary, but the deepest shift begins not with what we leave behind, but how we see what's in front of us. A new place can't save us from old patterns, but a new perception can free us even when nothing else changes. In this way, Stoicism quietly rewires the way we live, not by removing challenges, but by changing their meaning. Obstacles become opportunities for discipline. Conflict becomes a chance for clarity. Delay becomes an exercise in patience. We begin to see life as a teacher, not a threat. And the world becomes not gentler, but more workable because we are no longer fragile. This shift doesn't mean we never feel. It means we learn to feel fully, without drowning. We allow grief without resistance. We sit with discomfort without resentment. And strangely, by letting go of the fight against reality, we find a kind of peace we never found in chasing control. Imagine a day where your mind is still, not because the world was quiet, but because you no longer gave it power over your well-being. Imagine facing criticism with curiosity, not defensiveness. Imagine seeing delay, not as stolen time, but as an opening for presence. These shifts are small, but they are sacred, and they build a life not just of outer function, but inner freedom. At the end of it all, Stoicism doesn't give you more control. It reminds you what was yours all along: the power to choose your stance, to frame meaning, to return again and again to what matters. It asks only that you see clearly, and then choose wisely. So now, we return to the heart of this journey, the insight from Epictetus, that people are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them. That between what happens and how we suffer lies a space. And in that space is not just peace, but possibility. This truth is not a slogan, it's a compass. One that won't eliminate hardship, but will transform how you walk through it. One that won't silence emotion, but will allow it to pass without taking your clarity with it. This way of seeing invites reflection. What story are you telling yourself right now about who you are, what you lack, what must happen for you to be okay? Is that story true? Or is it just familiar? Could you loosen its grip? Could you meet this moment, not with judgment, but with attention? Let this be your practice, not perfection, but presence, not control, but care. Each day, each moment, you're given another chance to return, to choose perspective over panic, clarity over chaos, response over reaction. That choice is your freedom, and even if the world never changes, that freedom changes everything. Thank you for walking this path of reflection with me. If these words sparked something, a pause, a breath, a shift, I hope you carry it gently into your day. Life won't stop testing you, but with practice, you can learn to meet it differently. You don't need to control everything to find peace. You only need to see with honesty and choose with intention. If you found meaning here, I invite you to stay with the journey, subscribe, revisit this space when needed, or simply take the insight and live it in your own quiet way. Until next time, stay grounded, stay curious, and remember, what matters most is not what happens, but how you meet it.